With the exception of the series pilot, almost every episode of Disney's new DuckTales reboot has taken place close to home. We've seen the Duck family explore Scrooge's money bin, abandoned subway tunnels under Duckburg, and the terrifying world of trendy technology companies. But what we haven't seen is the kind of grand adventure Donald Duck and Uncle Scrooge comics were always known for. Tales that dig deep into history, myth, and legend. That's the kind of story I've been waiting for, and it's finally here. Get ready to go globetrotting, because this is the living mummies of Toth-ra. If someone asked you to find one word that described DuckTales or any of the comics that inspired it, adventure would probably be one of the first answers to come to mind. While it's true that there are plenty of old Duck comics, cartoons, and stories that focus on gags, jokes, and wordplay, a lot of the most memorable stories are the ones that took these beloved characters across the globe. The Living Mummies of Toth-ra is one of the first episodes of the new DuckTales reboot to continue that tradition. At a glance, this looks very much like the beginning of a classic DuckTales story. We join the crew in an exotic location, already on their adventure, and follow along with them as they solve mysteries and rewrite history. But the reboot handles that a little differently than the original show. While the Living Mummies of Toth-ra is absolutely in vein of classic stories, every traditional beat of this adventure is subverted in some way, usually broken up with a bit of comedy. Scrooge's epic reveal of the tomb of Toth-ra, for instance, a pyramid he spent decades searching for, is interrupted by Launchpad eating a burrito.
This is the last of the lost pyramids. Show some respect.
Or take this looming threat of a monster that teases viewers before a commercial break. It's instantly deflated as a friendly local.
Hey, what's up?
This kind of stuff happens all the time in this episode. To the point that, although the story never completely veers away from the pseudo-archaeological adventure, it plays with all those common tropes that are key to that kind of adventure. For instance, instead of finding ruins full of undead mummies, Scrooge and the kids find a pyramid with a whole living city inside of it. And the mummies within aren't supernatural, bandages just happen to be fashionable.
We are not mummies. We merely dress in this manner to honor our powerful and fashion-forward leader.
And when the group finds that the city of people is living under the oppression of an unjust ruler, it isn't a rousing speech about freedom and independence that convinces them to rise up and fight back, but the promise of a delicious burrito.
Where do we get this burrito?
Outside, where freedom is.
Burritos are outside?
We must have burritos! Rise up against the mighty Toth-ra!
Seriously?
And in some ways, this comedy diffuses the epic nature of the adventure. Every time the episode seems to be gaining steam in a way you'd expect, it deflates the tension with gags and unexpected jokes. And to be honest, I kind of have mixed feelings about that. It left me wanting for the adventure I didn't get, but it also kept the story moving in unexpected directions. By dodging all the common Duck adventure tropes, this episode was able to create a story I couldn't predict. And that's kind of refreshing and fun. And all those changes, they weren't random either. Almost every turn introduced by a joke in this episode pays off in the story later. It's actually kind of well put together. In the end, I think it works, partially because of how self-aware the show is, but not in a self-mocking way. It's true that the gags driving this story work because they're subverting expectations we might have of a DuckTales adventure, but they're not being made to mock those expectations, but to put them in the perspective of who these characters are. In the original DuckTales show and the old Uncle Scrooge comics, Donald and the boys seem to be just as seasoned of adventures as their great uncle. Ancient temples, mummies, supernatural beings, and living myths didn't faze any of them. But in the new DuckTales reboot, it's really only Scrooge who has a history of exploring forgotten tombs. It's true that Webby has some knowledge of history, and Huey knows what the Junior Woodchuck guidebook knows. But for the most part, they're all relatively green when it comes to adventure. Particularly the green one.
And that's why you don't scream while sinking in quicksand.
Webby, please don't tell me how to die!
If this episode really is all about subverting the typical tropes of a DuckTales adventure, then this subversion is my favorite. Not only does it diffuse the notion that Huey, Dewey, and Louie were great at adventuring from the moment they started going on trips with their Uncle Scrooge, but it briefly focuses on why each of them has room to grow as adventurers. Huey, for instance, is extremely serious and good at making plans, but as we saw in the Terra Firmians episode, he's a bit too quick to dismiss myths and the possibility of supernatural obstacles. Dewey, on the other hand, is eager and completely enthralled by the idea of adventure, but just like in the pilot, he's not very careful, and he lets his enthusiasm get away from him too easy. I also really like how these two play off of each other. how excited Dewey is at the possibility of finding monsters and mummies, and how grounded in reality Huey is about how probable that actually is.
Unlikely. Mummification was an expensive process meant for royalty. It'd be rare for more than one mummy. Toth-ra was pretty rich. I bet there's at least 6.
Yet, Huey's still nice enough as an older brother to let his brother's fantasy live on. Those two are cute and all, but Louie's failings as an adventurer gets the biggest focus in this episode. He's brash, savvy, and confident, but he's also too sure of himself. Basically, he thinks he can bluff his way out of any situation.
As long as you could talk your way out. Trademark Louie Duck.
The problem is, he can't. Webby spends the whole episode trying to get him to be more careful, not to touch cursed items, not to antagonize the Pharaoh, and to think before he acts. But Louie doesn't listen until it's too late.
Fine! Look, I'm just a scared kid who talked himself into a problem that he can't get out of, okay? There's no more rule bending!
And I think this is actually what I like best about this episode. This isn't just the show's first real globe-trotting adventure, but it's also the main cast's first big adventure together after Atlantis. And it really shows how inexperienced some of them are. Dewey and Louie usually make things up as they go, pretending to be adventures like what they've seen on TV, movies, or in comic books. But in reality, they have no idea what they're doing.
Basic rule of treasure hunting. If it might be cursed, don't touch it. Stop touching everything!
There are a lot of fun references in this episode too. Most notably, an homage to the Wizard of Oz near the end, and the pink bow on Webby's hat, which references the original DuckTales movie. Those are a lot of fun, but I'm mostly just happy to see the family's first big globe-trotting adventure since the premiere. And although part of me wishes it stuck a little bit closer to the tropes of the pulp serial adventures that inspired the original comics, I think I'm ultimately glad that it bucked trends and took the story in a new direction I didn't expect. It was silly, sure, but it was also a ton of fun, and I can't wait to see where DuckTales goes next. That's it for this episode. We have one more to go before we catch up to the show's hiatus. If you want to see more DuckTales stuff, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I'll be putting up a few more videos during the show's break, plus creating some new non-DuckTales content you might be interested in. Either way, thanks for watching everyone, and take it easy.